The conference room at Microsoft headquarters carries the particular silence of corporate power. Climate-controlled air, soft carpeting that absorbs footsteps, windows that filter Seattle's grey light into something cleaner and more neutral. Bill Gates sits across from a team of federal prosecutors, his characteristic rocking motion stilled for the video camera. It is 1998, and the man who controls the software on 9 out of every 10 computers on Earth is being deposed in United States versus Microsoft Corporation. He has been asked a simple question about the definition of the word "we." The lawyers wait. The camera records. Bill's face shows a micro-expression of irritation, barely perceptible, gone in a fraction of a second, but captured on video for posterity. He adjusts his glasses, a nervous habit that has persisted since childhood. Outside, Seattle's tech corridor hums with activity. Amazon expanding its warehouse operations, real networks shipping streaming media software, hundreds of smaller companies riding the internet boom that Microsoft both enabled and now seeks to control. Inside this room, the future of the world's most powerful software company hangs on semantics. For the next 8 hours, Gates will fence with lawyers over semantics, feigning confusion about the meaning of basic words, claiming not to remember conversations from months earlier, responding to straightforward questions with baroque technical diversions. At one point, asked about an email he wrote, he will reply, "What do you mean by ask?" The performance is simultaneously brilliant and disastrous, a demonstration of Gates's legendary combativeness and his tone deafness about how ordinary people perceive power. The deposition videos, when released, will shock even Microsoft's defenders. They reveal something the carefully managed public image had concealed. Beneath the nerdy exterior lies someone accustomed to dominating every interaction, someone who cannot bear to concede even the smallest point. The government attorney, David Boies, watches with the patience of someone who has studied his opponent for months. Boies has reviewed thousands of internal Microsoft emails, sat through dozens of depositions with Gates's lieutenants, mapped the network of agreements and threats that maintained Windows dominance. He knows Gates's patterns, the deflections, the technical rabbit holes, the strategic amnesia. Every evasion, every semantic game, every display of contempt for the process becomes evidence not just of obstruction, but of the mentality that created a monopoly. Boies does not need Gates to confess. He needs Gates to reveal himself, and Bill, unable to resist the impulse to dominate, obliges. This is not how the story was supposed to end, or perhaps it is precisely how it had to end. The boy who got his first taste of computing power at 13 and became obsessed with control over code, control over the industry, control over the future, now faces the one adversary he cannot outsmart or outlast: the United States government, wielding the same antitrust laws that broke Standard Oil and AT&T. Everything he built, the empire that made him the richest human on the planet, hangs in the balance. And the weapon being used against him is the very thing that made Microsoft dominant. His refusal to let anyone else have power in the computing world he believes belongs to him. But to understand how Bill Gates arrived in that conference room, to understand why the government decided this particular monopolist had to be stopped, to understand what it reveals about ambition and privilege and the distance between the stories we tell about success and the reality of how power actually works, we have to go back 3 decades, to Seattle in 1968, to an elite private school, and a remarkable accident of timing that would change everything. Before we go further into that story, I want to ask you something. If you're finding this exploration of power and myth-making compelling, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I spend months researching each of these documentaries, and your support makes it possible to keep digging into the stories behind the stories we think we know. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know. Now let's go back to where it really began. In the autumn of 1967, William Henry Gates III enrolls at Lakeside School in Seattle. He is 12 years old. The school occupies a campus in the city's north end, brick buildings arranged around playing fields, the architecture conveying exactly what the $5,000 annual tuition promises: tradition, seriousness, access to institutions that matter. Lakeside is not Andover or Exeter, but in Seattle it occupies the same social space, the school where the city's doctors, lawyers, and business executives send their children to ensure they remain doctors, lawyers, and business executives. The campus itself tells a story about access and expectation. Gothic Revival architecture, imported from East Coast prep school aesthetics. A library stocked with first editions and rare manuscripts. Science laboratories with equipment most public schools cannot afford. Playing fields maintained to country club standards. Faculty recruited from elite universities, many with doctoral degrees, teaching loads light enough to allow actual attention to individual students. The student-teacher ratio is 8:1. Every student is known. Every student is expected to excel. Bill's father, William H. Gates Sr., is a partner at one of Seattle's most prominent law firms. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, taught school before having children and now sits on multiple corporate and non-profit boards. They live in a comfortable house in an upper, middle-class neighborhood. They are not wealthy by Seattle standards, not Boeing executives or timber barons, but they are professional class, the kind of family where college is assumed, where Harvard or Yale is discussed as a realistic possibility, where the path from prep school to Ivy League to corner office is clearly marked and well-trodden. Mary Gates, in particular, is a formidable presence. She serves on the boards of the United Way, the University of Washington Board of Regents, and several corporate boards. She moves in Seattle's civic elite circles with ease, organizing fundraisers, chairing committees, cultivating relationships that span business, academia, and philanthropy. Her social capital will prove crucial years later, though in 1967 no one imagines how. For now, she is simply a well-connected mother, ensuring her children receive every advantage. Bill is the middle child with an older sister and a younger one. From early childhood, he displays an intensity that sometimes troubles his parents. He rocks obsessively when thinking. He argues ferociously about everything. He reads encyclopedias for entertainment. When he becomes interested in something, he pursues it with manic focus, to the exclusion of sleep, food, social niceties. His mother, a woman of considerable will herself, sometimes clashes with her son's stubbornness. Once, during an argument at the dinner table, she throws a glass of water in his face. The family briefly considers therapy. The consensus that emerges: Bill is brilliant, difficult, and will probably be fine if given sufficient challenge. The therapy sessions, brief as they are, reveal something important. The psychologist notes that Bill's intensity is not pathological but directional. He needs problems worthy of his focus. Without challenge, he becomes restless, argumentative, difficult. With appropriate challenge, the same intensity becomes extraordinary productivity. This insight will prove prophetic. For the rest of his life, Bill will oscillate between these poles. Engaged and brilliant when solving complex problems, impossible and destructive when understimulated or constrained. Lakeside provides challenge. The school runs on the Socratic method. Students expected to engage, argue, defend positions. Teachers treat 12-year-olds as junior adults. The student body includes future scientists, writers, politicians. Competition is normalized. Excellence is expected. It is the kind of environment where a difficult, brilliant boy might thrive rather than be marginalized. In Bill's first year, he encounters teachers who recognize his capabilities and refuse to be intimidated by his argumentativeness. A mathematics teacher challenges him with advanced problems, tolerating his impatience with basic material in exchange for engagement with complex concepts. An English teacher demands that his essays support assertions with evidence, teaching him that intelligence without rigor is mere opinion. A history teacher encourages debate, creating space for Bill's combativeness to become intellectual skill rather than social liability. But none of this explains what happens in 1968. That year, the Lakeside Mothers Club holds a rummage sale. The proceeds, several $1,000s, are designated for the school. The club decides to purchase something educational. After consultation with faculty, they buy something almost no school in America possesses: access to a computer. The decision is not obvious. Several board members question whether the expense is justified. Computers are exotic machines, their practical value uncertain. Some parents worry the purchase is frivolous, that the money could be better spent on library books or laboratory equipment, tangible resources with clear educational purpose. But a few parents work in Seattle's emerging technology sector, Boeing's engineering divisions, the University of Washington's computer science department, local electronics firms. They argue that computing represents the future, that exposing students to this technology now will provide advantages later. The debate is lengthy. Eventually, the progressives win. Understand what this means. In 1968, computers are room-sized machines owned by universities, corporations, and the military. They cost millions of dollars. Programming them requires specialized knowledge and institutional access. A computer is not something a 13-year-old encounters unless that 13-year-old attends one of perhaps a dozen schools in the entire country with the resources and vision to provide access. The Mothers Club purchases time on a GE mainframe downtown, accessible via teletype terminal. The terminal sits in a small room in Lakeside's Science Building. Students can sign up for time to write programs in BASIC and Fortran. The terminal itself is an ASR-33 teletype, a mechanical marvel that types at 10 characters per second, prints program output on rolls of yellow paper, and connects to the distant mainframe via phone line. The machine is loud, industrial, utterly unglamorous. When it operates, the typing mechanism clatters like a machine gun. The paper smells of ink and possibility. For the first time in human history, high school students can write code and see it execute immediately. Bill Gates discovers the terminal almost immediately. He is 13 years old and he has found something that responds exactly to what he inputs. Computers do not care about his social awkwardness, his intensity, his argumentativeness. They simply execute instructions. If the program is wrong, the computer will tell him. If it is right, it will work. The feedback is immediate, logical, completely meritocratic. For a mind like his, precise, competitive, hungry for control, this is not just interesting, it is addictive. The first program Bill writes is simple, a tic-tac-toe game. The code is straightforward, the logic uncomplicated. But the experience of writing instructions, submitting them to the machine, seeing the results, this loop becomes instantly compulsive. He writes another program, then another. Each success creates hunger for greater complexity. Within weeks, he is attempting programs beyond the curriculum, teaching himself from manuals, experimenting with techniques he barely understands. He begins spending all available time at the terminal. Other students drift away after initial curiosity. Bill stays. He skips gym class to program. He arrives at school early, stays late, comes in on weekends. The school eventually limits terminal time to prevent him from monopolizing the resource. He circumvents the limits by hacking into the scheduling system. When that is discovered and he is banned, he breaks into the terminal room at night. The school's response is simultaneously punishment and recognition. They make him responsible for computerizing the class scheduling system. It is his first programming job. The scheduling program is genuinely complex. Lakeside offers dozens of courses with varying prerequisites and enrollment limits. Students have scheduling preferences. Teachers have time constraints. The combinatorics are sophisticated. Bill writes code that takes these inputs and generates conflict-free schedules. The program works. The school administration is impressed. Bill is 13 years old and has written software that solves a real institutional problem. More importantly, he has tasted power. His code makes decisions that affect hundreds of people. This is intoxicating. During this period, he meets Paul Allen. Allen is 2 years older, already at Lakeside when Bill arrives. Where Bill is intense and combative, Paul is mellow and theoretical. Bill likes to win arguments. Paul likes to think about systems. They are perfectly complementary. Paul has access to a car. Bill has an allowance and no interest in anything except computing. Together they discover that the University of Washington also has computers, and that these computers occasionally crash, revealing passwords and system vulnerabilities when they reboot. They exploit this. They sneak into the computer labs at night. They accumulate machine time the way other teenagers accumulate comic books or records. Paul Allen is the first person Bill meets who matches his obsession. Other Lakeside students are interested in computing, but for most it is one interest among many. For Paul, as for Bill, computing is everything. They speak the same language, not just programming languages, but the conceptual language of systems, algorithms, efficiency. They can discuss bubble sort versus merge sort with the intensity other teenagers reserve for sports or music. They understand each other's jokes about compiler optimization. They share the sense that they are glimpsing a future most people cannot yet see. Their partnership develops a natural division of labor. Bill is the better pure programmer, faster, more meticulous, better at debugging. Paul is the better systems thinker, able to see architectural patterns, anticipate how components will interact, imagine possibilities beyond current constraints. Bill writes code. Paul designs systems. Bill optimizes algorithms. Paul reads research papers about upcoming processor architectures. Bill is tactician. Paul is strategist. Together, they are formidable. In 1970, when Bill is 15, the Computer Center Corporation, one of the Seattle area companies providing terminal time, discovers that several Lakeside students have been exploiting bugs to get free computing time. The company bans them, but instead of ending the relationship, CCC offers a deal: find bugs in the system, and we will give you free time. Bill and Paul become professional debuggers while still in high school. They are paid in the currency they value most: unlimited access to computers. The CCC arrangement teaches them something crucial. Computing expertise has commercial value. Companies will pay for skills they possess. This seems obvious now in an era where teenage programmers can command six-figure salaries. In 1970, it is revelation. Computing is emerging from academic research and military application into commercial viability. The people who understand these systems, who can write code, find bugs, optimize performance, possess rare and valuable skills. Bill and Paul are among the youngest people on Earth to recognize this and position themselves to exploit it. They form a small company, Trafo Data, to analyze traffic flow data for municipalities. The venture makes modest money, around $20,000 over several years. More importantly, it teaches them business formation, client relations, the gap between interesting technical problems and marketable products. They are still teenagers. They are already thinking like entrepreneurs. The Trafo data experience is simultaneously success and failure. Success because they build a working product, acquire paying clients, and learn business fundamentals. Failure because the market is small, the technology not quite mature enough, and their youth works against them. City officials are reluctant to trust important infrastructure analysis to high school students. But the lessons are invaluable. They learn that technical capability is necessary but insufficient for business success. They learn that timing matters. Being too early is indistinguishable from being wrong. They learn that credibility is currency, that perception shapes opportunity. By the time Bill graduates from Lakeside in 1973, he has accumulated approximately 10,000 hours of programming experience. To put this in perspective, in 1973 there are perhaps a few hundred people on Earth under the age of 20 with comparable programming experience. Most professional programmers have less. University computer science departments are just beginning to standardize curricula. Bill has been programming for 5 years, obsessively with access to machines and time that almost no one his age anywhere in the world possesses. Malcolm Gladwell will later call this kind of extraordinary opportunity the chance to practice, the 10,000 hours that separate the good from the historically transformative. But Gladwell's analysis, while accurate about the hours, undersells the exclusivity of the opportunity. This is not 10,000 hours of violin practice, available to anyone willing to rent an instrument and find a teacher. This is 10,000 hours of computer access at a moment when such access is rarer than private jet ownership. Consider the improbability. The Lakeside Mothers Club could have spent their fundraising money on anything: athletic equipment, art supplies, library books. They chose a computer terminal. That terminal could have been installed in any of thousands of American high schools. It was installed at Bill's school. Bill could have tried the terminal once and decided computing was boring. Instead, he became obsessed. The school could have permanently banned him when he hacked the scheduling system. Instead, they gave him a programming job. CCC could have simply banned the bug-exploiting students permanently. Instead, they hired them. Each node in this network of circumstance was improbable. Together, they were virtually impossible. The remarkable thing is that Bill does not seem to recognize how extraordinary his access has been. In later accounts of this period, he emphasizes his obsession and work ethic, the countless hours programming, the skipped meals, the all-nighters. These are real, but they are enabled by circumstances that are almost unimaginably privileged. A family that can afford elite private school, a school with computer access, a local computing industry willing to give teenagers paid debugging work. Parents who support their son's interest even as he accumulates school violations and neglects other subjects. When Bill discusses his early programming years, he frames it as individual determination triumphing through sheer force of will. This is not exactly false, but it is radically incomplete. He is accepted to Harvard. Of course he is. His SAT scores are nearly perfect. His teachers write glowing recommendations. His family background makes him exactly the kind of applicant Harvard exists to admit. In the fall of 1973, Bill enrolls as a freshman, planning to study mathematics and eventually law. The expectation, his parents' expectation, his own stated expectation, is that he will graduate, perhaps get a graduate degree, enter a profession. He will be successful in the way children of upper-middle-class professional families are successful. He will make a good living. He will matter in his chosen field. He will be respectable. Harvard in 1973 represents the pinnacle of American educational prestige. The campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with its Georgian architecture and vast endowment, exists to credential future leaders. Students arrive from Exeter, Andover, Groton. the feeder schools that pipeline privileged children into Ivy League institutions. The culture combines intellectual rigor with social networking. Students study hard, but they also join finals clubs, make connections, position themselves for careers in law, medicine, finance, academia. Harvard is not merely education, it is credentialing and network formation, but Harvard in 1973 is also computing paradise. The university has its own PDP-10 mainframe. Graduate students are working on operating systems and networking. The culture combines East Coast intellectual prestige with access to some of the most advanced computing resources in the world. Bill discovers the computer lab in his first weeks and, once again, disappears into it. He skips classes, he programs through the night. He meets other students obsessed with computing, including Steve Ballmer, an economics major, who lives down the hall and who will eventually become Microsoft's CEO and Bill's most important business partner. Steve Ballmer is everything Bill is not. Gregarious, where Bill is awkward. Athletic, where Bill is sedentary. Loud and enthusiastic, where Bill is intense and focused. Ballmer plays on the football team, joins multiple student organizations, seems to know everyone on campus. But he is also brilliant. His economics coursework is exceptional, his analytical thinking sharp. He and Bill develop an unlikely friendship based on complementary capabilities. Bill understands technology, Ballmer understands people and organizations. Bill can write code for 18 hours straight. Ballmer can sell anything to anyone. They are puzzle pieces that fit. Paul Allen, meanwhile, has enrolled at Washington State University but drops out after 2 years. He moves to Boston, taking a programming job at Honeywell. He and Bill spend enormous amounts of time together, talking about computing trends, debugging systems, imagining what might be possible as computers get smaller and cheaper. Moore's law, the observation that computing power doubles approximately every 2 years, is creating a clear trajectory. Computers are getting exponentially more powerful and cheaper. The question is, what happens when computers become affordable enough for individuals, not just institutions, to own? They spend hours in Cambridge coffee shops, sketching ideas on napkins. Paul follows developments in processor technology with the intensity of a sports fan tracking statistics. He knows Intel's roadmap, understands the implications of 8-bit versus 16-bit architectures, can explain why DRAM density improvements matter for system design. Bill absorbs this information, asks questions that probe assumptions, pushes Paul to think through second-order effects. Their conversations are simultaneously technical speculation and entrepreneurial fantasy. What if computers become cheap enough for households? What software would they need? Who would write it? In January 1975, the answer arrives. Popular Electronics magazine features the Altair 8800 on its cover. The Altair is a kit computer, essentially a box with switches and lights, requiring assembly and programming to do anything useful. But it costs under $400. For the first time, a computer exists that an individual could conceivably purchase. The machine uses the Intel 8080 processor. It has no operating system, no software, no interface beyond switches, but it can theoretically run programs if someone writes them. Bill and Paul see the magazine in Harvard Square. They immediately understand what it represents. If people are going to buy computers, and they now can, those computers need software. Software must be written by someone, that someone could be them. They have the skills. They have 5 years of intensive programming partnership. They are obsessed with computing at exactly the moment computing becomes consumer accessible. The opportunity is obvious. The question is whether they will act on it. The moment crystallizes everything. Paul picks up the magazine, shows Bill the cover. Neither speaks for several seconds. Then Bill says, "We need to do this." Not "we could do this," or "this might be interesting." We need to. The urgency is immediate and total. This is the opportunity they have been preparing for without knowing it. Every hour of programming since Lakeside has been training for this moment. They will either seize it or watch someone else do so. They call Emirates the Albuquerque company manufacturing the Altair. Bill, then 19, speaks to Ed Roberts, the company's founder. He claims that he and Paul have written a basic interpreter for the Altair. This is a lie. They have not written anything. They do not own an Altair. They have never seen an Intel 8080 chip, but they believe they can write the interpreter if given the chance. Roberts, skeptical but intrigued, agrees to look at what they have. Ed Roberts is a gruff engineer who built Emirates from a calculator company into a computer manufacturer through sheer force of will. He is skeptical of the college kids calling from Harvard. Dozens of people have contacted him claiming to have software for the Altair. None have delivered, but Roberts also understands that the Altair needs software to be useful. A computer that can only blink lights has limited appeal. If these kids can deliver a working basic interpreter, it would transform the Altair from hobbyist curiosity into programmable computer. He tells them to come demonstrate it. They have 8 weeks. Neither has any other commitments. Paul is working his programming job. Bill is nominally enrolled at Harvard, but attending few classes. They obtain an Intel 8080 manual. They write an emulator on Harvard's PDP-10 that mimics the 8080's behavior. Then they write the basic interpreter, working 18-hour days, testing obsessively. Bill writes most of the code. Paul handles the system's architecture. They have no way to test on actual Altair hardware. They are writing code for a machine they have never touched, gambling that their emulation is accurate enough. The development process is intense even by their standards. Bill essentially moves into the computer lab, sleeping on a cot when exhaustion becomes unavoidable, subsisting on vending machine food and Coca-Cola. He writes code in marathon sessions, 10 hours, 12 hours, sometimes longer. The code is elegant, compact, efficient. Basic interpreters typically require substantial memory and processor resources. Bill writes one that fits in 4K of memory and runs fast enough to be usable on the Altair's limited hardware. This is not merely competent programming, this is virtuoso performance. Paul handles the parts Bill has no patience for, managing the interface with MIT, coordinating logistics, ensuring the emulator accurately reflects the 8080's behavior. He also serves as Bill's reality check, the person who can say, "That approach won't work," and be heard. Their partnership operates with minimal communication. They understand each other's thinking well enough that Paul can write system interfaces for code Bill has not yet written, confident it will integrate cleanly. The night before Paul flies to Albuquerque, they discover a critical bug, a memory management error that crashes the interpreter under certain conditions. Bill has 12 hours to find and fix it. He does. He writes a paper tape bootloader on the plane's tarmac, hands it to Paul through the window. They have done everything possible. Now they will discover whether it works. Paul flies to Albuquerque to demonstrate the interpreter. He loads the paper tape into the Altair. The program runs. For the first time, an Altair owner can write programs in BASIC rather than machine code. Emirates agrees to license the interpreter. They name it Altair BASIC. It becomes the standard. Paul moves to Albuquerque to work with MITS. Bill remains at Harvard through the end of the semester, then drops out to join Paul full-time. The decision to drop out is both easier and harder than it appears. Easier because Bill is intellectually confident that computing represents a larger opportunity than completing Harvard. His professors are teaching computer science theory. He is writing commercial software. The formal credential matters less than the timing window. Personal computers are emerging now. The opportunity will not wait for graduation. Harder because Bill is acutely aware of disappointing his parents, particularly his mother, who has invested heavily in his Harvard enrollment and sees it as natural culmination of his academic trajectory. The conversation with his parents is difficult. They eventually accept his decision, conditioned on his ability to return to Harvard later if Microsoft fails. This safety net, the knowledge that Harvard will take him back, that failure is not permanent, makes the decision lower risk than it appears in the Dropout mythology. They name their company Microsoft, a contraction of microcomputer software. The hyphen will later disappear. The company consists of 2 people operating out of an Albuquerque strip mall. Their initial revenue is royalties from Altair Basic sales. They hire a few programmers. They write versions of Basic for other emerging microcomputers. The work is technically demanding but straightforward. Take their existing Basic implementation, adapt it to different processors and systems, license it to hardware manufacturers. By 1978, Microsoft has 13 employees and gross revenues approaching $1 million. They are successful in the way small software companies serving niche markets are successful. Albuquerque in 1975 is an improbable location for what will become the world's most powerful software company. The city exists primarily as a support structure for Sandia National Laboratories and Kirtland Air Force Base. Its downtown consists of low-slung buildings baked by desert sun. Emmett's occupies a warehouse in an industrial area. Microsoft rents space nearby, a shabby office with brown carpeting and fluorescent lights that hum constantly. The air conditioning struggles against New Mexico heat. There are no amenities, no corporate infrastructure, nothing resembling the technology campuses that will later define the industry. The early employees are misfits and obsessives. Mark McDonald, employee number 1, is a brilliant programmer who prefers working alone and communicates primarily through code comments. Rick Weiland, one of Bill's friends from Lakeside, joins early and becomes the company's quiet conscience, the person who mediates disputes and maintains relationships when Bill's intensity alienates people. Bob O'Rear is older, a NASA programmer with actual professional experience, and his presence provides technical credibility the younger team members lack. Marla Wood, hired as a secretary, gradually takes on administrative functions that transform into business operations management. Each person is critical because the company is too small for redundancy. The office culture is part graduate school, part commune. People work 16-hour days, not because anyone demands it explicitly, but because everyone else is doing it, and no one wants to be the person who leaves first. They order pizza at midnight and debate algorithm efficiency while eating over keyboards. They sleep on couches or under desks when exhaustion becomes unavoidable. Showers are irregular, laundry is neglected, the work is everything. Emmett's is down the street, providing both customer feedback and immediate market pressure. When Emmett's needs a feature or reports a bug, Microsoft's entire team mobilizes to fix it within hours. The feedback loop is immediate and unforgiving. Paul Allen serves as bridge between Bill's intensity and everyone else's humanity. Where Bill demands perfection and dismisses anything less, Paul explains what Bill actually wants and helps people understand that the criticism is not personal. Where Bill sees only the code and the market, Paul notices when people are burning out and suggests they take evenings off or weekends away. The partnership is complementary in ways beyond technical skills. Bill provides direction and standards, Paul provides translation and empathy. Without Paul, the early Microsoft culture might have been unbearable. With him, it is merely intense. The technical challenges are substantial and constant. Every microcomputer manufacturer uses different hardware, different processors, different memory architectures, different input-output systems. Basic must be adapted for each platform. This requires understanding hardware specifications that are often incomplete or inaccurate. writing code for processors the team does not own, testing on systems they must borrow or rent access to. They develop techniques for portable code, writing core functionality once, and creating hardware-specific layers for each platform. This approach, obvious now, is innovative then. It allows Microsoft to support multiple platforms without rewriting everything for each one. The financial pressure is relentless. Royalties from MITS provide revenue, but they are unpredictable and insufficient for rapid growth. Paul and Bill invest their own money repeatedly to make payroll. They negotiate advances from manufacturers, trading future royalties for immediate cash. They defer their own salaries when necessary. The company is always 60 or 90 days from running out of money. This precarity creates focus. There is no room for projects that do not generate revenue, no tolerance for inefficiency, no possibility of coasting. Every decision is existential. The early Microsoft culture is intense, chaotic, brilliant. Employees are young, mostly in their 20s, several straight from college. They work absurd hours, sleep in the office, live on pizza and soda. Bill sets the tone. If you are not obsessed, you do not belong. He reviews every line of code personally, often rewriting it himself if it does not meet his standards. He conducts critical reviews where he systematically dismantles employees' work, questioning assumptions, challenging design choices, demanding perfection. Some employees thrive under this pressure, others burn out or leave. But those who remain are forged into extraordinarily capable programmers. Bill's code review sessions become legendary and feared. He sits at a terminal, loads someone's code, and begins reading aloud, providing running commentary. "What is this?" he will ask, pointing to a section. The programmer explains the logic. "That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Bill responds, not with anger, but with genuine bafflement that anyone would write code that way. He then rewrites the section on the spot, demonstrating a more efficient approach. The humiliation is intense, but the learning is also intense. People emerge from these sessions either understanding why Bill's approach is superior or prepared to defend their design choices with rigorous technical justification. There is no room for "that is how I learned to do it" or "it works, so why change it?" Every line must be defensible. The culture is meritocratic in the narrowest sense. Social skills do not matter. Credentials do not matter. Age and experience do not matter beyond demonstrated capability. Only code quality matters. This creates an environment where brilliant young programmers can thrive immediately if their work is excellent. It also creates an environment where people who need positive feedback, who work better with encouragement than criticism, who value work-life balance, cannot survive. The selection pressure is intense. By 1978, the 13 people who remain are those for whom this culture is sustainable or even energizing. But Bill is already thinking beyond this. The hobbyist market, people buying Altairs and similar machines, is small. Most Altair owners copy software illegally rather than pay for it. Bill writes an open letter to hobbyists, arguing that people who copy software without paying are stealing and preventing professional software development. The letter is controversial in the hobbyist community, where information wants to be free ideology dominates. But it articulates something important about Bill's vision. Software is property, has value, and should be paid for. This seems obvious now, in an age of app stores and license agreements. In 1976, it is a minority position. The open letter reveals Bill's intellectual framework. He understands that professional software development requires compensation. Hobbyists copying software for free might seem harmless, but it prevents the emergence of a sustainable software industry. If software has no value, no one will invest in creating it professionally. This insight, that information goods require property rights to enable commercial development, is economically sophisticated and culturally unpopular. The hobbyist community reacts with hostility. Bill is unmoved, he is right, and eventually the market will prove it. The business grows incrementally. They move from Albuquerque back to Seattle in 1979. Microsoft remains small, profitable, but not remarkable. The microcomputer industry is fragmented, dozens of incompatible systems, each with tiny market share, each requiring adapted software. There is no reason to believe Microsoft will become more than a successful boutique operation. Seattle is home, Bill's parents are there, Paul's family is there. The technology community, while smaller than Silicon Valley's, is sophisticated. Boeing's aerospace engineering, the University of Washington's research programs, a growing ecosystem of software and hardware startups. Moving Microsoft to Seattle allows them to recruit from this talent pool while being near family and familiar surroundings. They rent office space in a suburban office park. The atmosphere is slightly more professional than Albuquerque, but only slightly. The culture remains work obsessively, ship excellent code, dominate every market entered. Then IBM calls. International Business Machines in 1980 dominates enterprise computing. Their mainframe systems run most corporate data processing. They are to computers what General Motors once was to automobiles, the inevitable choice, the safe option, the standard. But IBM has no presence in the emerging personal computer market. Apple has demonstrated that there is consumer demand. Other manufacturers are entering the space. IBM's executives decide the company needs a personal computer product. Characteristically, they approach this as a manufacturing and distribution problem. The technical details, operating system, programming language, applications, are assumed to be commodity items, easily sourced from multiple vendors. IBM's decision to enter the personal computer market is driven by anxiety as much as opportunity. The company's mainframe business remains strong, but executives recognize that computing is fragmenting. Mini-computers are eroding the low end of mainframe market share. Microcomputers are creating a new market IBM does not participate in. If personal computers become significant, IBM cannot afford to be absent. The decision is defensive, enter the market before it becomes too large to capture. IBM sets up a secret development team in Boca Raton, Florida. The team is given 12 months to design and ship a personal computer. To meet this deadline, they decide to use off-the-shelf components rather than IBM's traditional approach of proprietary hardware. They choose the Intel 8088 processor. They need an operating system. Someone, accounts differ on exactly who, mentions Microsoft as a possible vendor for programming languages. Mary Maxwell Gates, Bill's mother, sits on the United Way board with John Opal, IBM's chairman. Whether this connection facilitates the introduction remains unclear, but by August 1980, Microsoft is in discussions with IBM about providing BASIC and possibly an operating system for the IBM PC. The meeting in Seattle is classic corporate mismatch. IBM executives arrive in business suits, representing the world's largest computer company. Bill Gates arrives looking like a teenager, which he nearly is. He is 24, but appears younger. The IBM team initially mistakes him for an office assistant. When introductions establish that this young man is actually the president of Microsoft, the IBM executives are visibly taken aback. But they proceed. They need software. Microsoft has a track record delivering basic implementations. Bill recognizes immediately that IBM's urgency is leverage. They have committed to a 12-month development cycle. They are under enormous internal pressure to ship on schedule. This limits their negotiating flexibility. They need Microsoft more than Microsoft needs them. Microsoft has other customers, other products. IBM needs this particular deal to happen quickly. Bill is 24 years old and conducting negotiation judo against the world's largest computer company. The operating system question is more complex. IBM's initial plan is to license CP/M, the dominant operating system for 8-bit microcomputers, from Digital Research. Microsoft recommends this. Gary Kildall, Digital Research's founder, is the established figure in microcomputer operating systems. CPM is proven technology. The logical approach is to license it. But when IBM representatives fly to California to meet with Kildall, the meeting goes badly. Kildall has other commitments that day. Accounts differ on whether he is flying his plane as a hobby or on business travel. His wife, who manages business operations, refuses to sign IBM's non-disclosure agreement without legal review. IBM perceives this as unprofessional. They return to Microsoft asking if Microsoft can provide an operating system. What happened in that meeting remains one of computing history's great what-ifs. Kildall later claims he was on business travel and that his wife's caution about the NDA was reasonable. IBM representatives claim Kildall prioritized flying his plane over the most important business meeting of his life. The truth is, probably mundane. A scheduling conflict, a misunderstanding about the meeting's importance, a culture clash between IBM's corporate formality and Digital Research's casualness. But the consequences are historic. If Kildall had signed the NDA and negotiated a CPM license, IBM PCs would have run CPM, and Microsoft might have remained a programming language company. Bill sees the opportunity instantly. Microsoft does not have an operating system, but Seattle Computer Products, a local company, has created QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System, a CPM clone for 16-bit processors. Bill negotiates to license QDOS. Later, Microsoft purchases all rights for $50,000. Microsoft renames it MS-DOS, modifies it, and licenses it to IBM. The QDOS acquisition is brilliant business opportunism. Seattle Computer Products built QDOS because they needed an operating system for their hardware, and CPM for 16-bit systems did not exist yet. QDOS is functional but unsupported and unmarketed. Seattle Computer Products is a small hardware company with no software business ambitions. Bill recognizes that QDOS's value depends entirely on the IBM deal. To Seattle Computer Products, it is worth perhaps $50,000, some compensation for development costs. To Microsoft, if the IBM deal closes, it is worth millions. Bill negotiates the purchase without revealing the IBM context. This is sharp practice, arguably exploitative. It is also perfectly legal in exactly how business advantages are captured. Here is where the deal becomes historic. Microsoft licenses MS-DOS to IBM non-exclusively. IBM can sell it with IBM PCs, but Microsoft retains the right to license MS-DOS to any other manufacturer. IBM's lawyers apparently do not object strenuously to this term. IBM is focused on hardware. Software is incidental. The real money, IBM believes, will be in selling machines. Let the kid from Seattle handle the software side. IBM's miscalculation is understandable in context. In 1980, IBM's entire business model is predicated on proprietary hardware, generating recurring revenue through maintenance contracts and component sales. Software is what makes the hardware useful, but hardware is where profits lie. IBM executives cannot imagine a world where software is more valuable than hardware. The operating system is just code, easily replicable, inherently commodity-like. The hardware, the engineering, manufacturing, distribution, is where competitive advantage resides. This assumption is not stupid. It is based on decades of mainframe business experience. It is also completely wrong for personal computers. This is the single most consequential business agreement in computing history. Within 2 years, other manufacturers begin producing IBM PC clones, machines that run the same Intel processor, use the same peripheral cards, and require the same operating system. Every clone manufacturer needs MS-DOS. Microsoft provides it. The more successful the IBM PC becomes, the more valuable MS-DOS becomes, and Microsoft, not IBM, controls it. The IBM PC launches in August 1981. It is immediately successful. IBM's brand name legitimizes personal computers for businesses. Within 18 months, the IBM PC and its clones dominate the business personal computer market. Every machine ships with MS-DOS. Microsoft's revenues explode. By 1983, Microsoft has over 200 employees. Revenue exceeds $50 million. Bill Gates is 27 years old and runs the software company that controls the operating system on the majority of business computers being sold in America. The growth is exponential and chaotic. Microsoft hires programmers as fast as it can recruit them. The office space expands constantly. New buildings, new floors, eventually a dedicated campus. The culture struggles to scale. Bill still tries to review every line of code, but the volume has become impossible. He delegates reluctantly, trusting only a small inner circle. Meetings become legendary for their intensity, Bill demanding explanations, challenging assumptions, occasionally declaring ideas the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Some employees find this culture exhilarating, others find it toxic. But everyone understands Microsoft is becoming powerful, and Bill is the source of that power. The press begins noticing. Businessweek profiles the young millionaire running Microsoft. The narrative is irresistible. Harvard dropout becomes tech titan through genius and vision. Bill, in these early press accounts, is presented as brilliant but eccentric, rocking in his chair during meetings, working 18-hour days, living on pizza and Coca-Cola, seemingly indifferent to normal markers of success like expensive cars or fashionable clothes. The nerd genius image is partly true, but it also obscures something. Bill is a sophisticated businessman executing a deliberate strategy to control the industry. Microsoft in the early 1980s operates with single-minded focus on market dominance. When a competitor emerges, Microsoft responds by bundling equivalent functionality into MS-DOS or Windows. When a partner becomes too successful, Microsoft enters their market segment. The company develops a reputation for aggressive tactics. Former employees and partners describe Bill's management style as confrontational, sometimes brutal. In meetings, he reportedly dismisses ideas as the stupidest thing I've ever heard. If he disagrees, he demands total commitment from employees. The culture is intensely competitive, both internally and externally. The embrace, extend, extinguish strategy becomes Microsoft's pattern. Embrace an emerging standard or technology. Extend it with proprietary Microsoft features. Extinguish competitors who cannot match Microsoft's integration and bundling. The approach works repeatedly. Spreadsheets, word processing, databases, networking, protocols. Microsoft identifies successful product categories, builds competitive versions, bundles them with Windows or MS-DOS, leverages the operating system monopoly to gain market share, then dominates through integration advantages competitors cannot match. Paul Allen, meanwhile, grows increasingly uncomfortable with the company's direction and his relationship with Bill. In 1982, Allen is diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He takes medical leave. During this period, Allen later claims he overhears Bill and Steve Ballmer discussing how to dilute Allen's ownership stake, taking advantage of his absence. Allen, feeling betrayed, leaves Microsoft in 1983. He retains his shares and remains on the board, but the partnership that created Microsoft is effectively over. Allen will later describe Bill as brilliant but ruthlessly willing to exploit any advantage, even against friends. Bill disputes Allen's account but offers no detailed rebuttal. The friendship never fully recovers. Allen's departure is the first major rupture in Microsoft's founding team. Paul co-created Microsoft, wrote critical early code, provided strategic vision about where technology was heading, but by 1983 he has become peripheral to daily operations. Bill has surrounded himself with business operators like Steve Ballmer. The company's focus has shifted from elegant code to market dominance. Paul's departure is sad but also inevitable. He and Bill have diverged. Paul wants to explore technology. Bill wants to control the industry. These are different objectives, requiring different personalities and tactics. The mid-1980s see Microsoft extending its dominance. the company goes public in 1986. The IPO makes Bill Gates, at 31, a multimillionaire with paper wealth of approximately $350 million. A year later, when Microsoft stock continues climbing, he becomes the youngest self-made billionaire in American history. His parents attend the IPO celebration. His father cries. The son who dropped out of Harvard, who worried them with his intensity and single-minded obsession, has become one of the wealthiest people in America. The IPO transforms Microsoft from successful private company to public phenomenon. Stock analysts cover the company. Institutional investors buy shares. Employees become millionaires as their stock options vest. Bill owns approximately 45% of Microsoft post-IPO. As the stock price climbs, his net worth increases automatically. He has created a wealth-generating machine that compounds faster than he can spend. The money is almost abstract, numbers in brokerage accounts, unrealized capital gains. But the power is concrete. Microsoft can outspend any competitor, hire the best programmers, sustain losses in strategic markets to gain dominance. But the operating system business, while lucrative, has limitations. MS-DOS is command line interface. Users type commands to make the computer do things. This requires memorizing syntax and commands. Apple, meanwhile, has introduced the Macintosh in 1984. The Mac uses a graphical user interface, Windows, icons, mouse control, based on technology developed at Xerox PARC. The interface is intuitive, visual, accessible to non-technical users. The Mac is expensive and has limited business software, but the interface clearly represents the future. Bill visits Apple headquarters and sees the Macintosh before its release. He immediately recognizes that graphical interface will dominate. Microsoft must have its own version or risk obsolescence. Steve Jobs shows Bill the Macintosh in late 1983 before the January 1984 launch. Jobs wants Microsoft to develop applications for the Mac, particularly spreadsheet and word processing software. Bill agrees, recognizing the Mac's potential, but he also sees something else. The graphical interface is the future, and it does not depend on Apple's proprietary hardware. If Microsoft can implement a similar interface for IBM PC compatibles, the larger installed base will win. Jobs, focused on the Mac launch, apparently does not perceive this as existential threat. He should have. Windows 1.0 ships in 1985. It is charitably disappointing. The interface is clunky. It requires substantial system resources. It has few applications. Apple sues, claiming Microsoft copied the Macintosh look and feel. The lawsuit will drag on for years. More problematically, consumers and businesses largely ignore Windows 1.0. MS-DOS remains dominant not because it is better, but because it is entrenched and compatible with existing software. Windows appears to be a failed product. The technical limitations are severe. Windows 1.0 requires significant memory. 640K barely suffices. Most PCs have less. The interface is slow, redrawing windows visibly. Applications crash frequently. The mouse support is unreliable. Disk-based systems make everything sluggish. Critically, there is no compelling reason to switch. MS-DOS works. Existing applications run under MS-DOS. Windows 1.0 offers minimal advantages at substantial cost in complexity and system requirements. The development struggle reveals tensions within Microsoft's technical culture. The Windows team works separately from the MS-DOS team, creating organizational rivalry. MS-DOS generates all of Microsoft's operating system revenue. Windows generates only costs and criticism. The MS-DOS team views Windows as unnecessary distraction, resource drain that diverts talent from profitable products. Why invest in graphical interface that nobody wants when MS-DOS upgrades generate immediate revenue? The argument has internal logic, but Bill overrules it. He has seen the Macintosh interface. He understands that graphical interface represents the future, regardless of current market indifference. The Windows development team faces technical challenges that seem insurmountable. IBM PC hardware was never designed for graphical interface. The 8088 processor is too slow to redraw complex screens. Available memory is insufficient for the operating system, application code, and graphics buffers simultaneously. Disk access is the bottleneck. Every operation requires reading from floppy disk, which is agonizingly slow. The mouse is optional peripheral that most users do not own. Applications must be rewritten specifically for Windows. They cannot simply run MS-DOS code in a window. Each of these problems is solvable individually, but the combination creates a system that is barely functional. The team tries various approaches. They experiment with memory management schemes that allow larger programs to run in limited memory. They optimize graphics code to reduce redraw time. They create device drivers that improve disk access performance. They build development tools that make it easier for programmers to write Windows applications. Each improvement helps marginally. None is sufficient. Windows 1.0 ships because Microsoft commits to a ship date and enforces it, not because the product is ready. Bill's philosophy is that shipping imperfect products is better than endless development. Customers provide feedback. Competitors reveal themselves. Market response clarifies what matters. Iteration happens in public. Competitors respond to Windows with mixture of mockery and imitation. Apple's lawsuit claims Microsoft stole the Macintosh interface, but Apple itself licensed much of that interface from Xerox PARC, so the legal ground is complicated. IBM develops its own graphical interface, OS/2, in partnership with Microsoft initially, but then independently. Digital Research releases GEM, a graphical environment for MS-DOS. Each competitor has advantages: Apple's integration with hardware, IBM's market credibility, Digital Research's technical elegance, but each also has constraints. Apple's system requires expensive Apple hardware. OS/2 requires more powerful computers than most businesses own. GEM faces legal challenges from Apple. Windows, despite being technically inferior to all of them, runs on standard IBM PC hardware that businesses already own. This proves decisive, but not for years. The competitive landscape creates complex dynamics. Microsoft is simultaneously partnering with IBM on OS/2 while developing Windows independently. This hedging strategy makes sense. If OS/2 succeeds, Microsoft shares revenue. If Windows succeeds, Microsoft controls it entirely. But IBM eventually recognizes the conflict and terminates the partnership. The break is acrimonious. IBM executives feel betrayed. They invested in joint development with Microsoft, sharing technical knowledge and market access, while Microsoft was simultaneously competing against them. Bill's perspective is that business partnerships are contingent. They last while mutually beneficial and end when they are not. IBM's perspective is that Microsoft violated trust. Both views have merit. The episode establishes Microsoft's reputation for aggressive business tactics that prioritize advantage over relationships. Bill's response is to persist. Windows 2.0 in 1987 is marginally better but still not compelling. Microsoft continues developing Windows even as the product loses money and draws mockery. This persistence is crucial to understanding Bill's approach. He is not a visionary who imagines perfect products and delivers them fully formed. He is a strategic incrementalist. See where the market is going, ship a mediocre first version, learn from it, iterate, use market position to make the inadequate product unavoidable, improve until it becomes good enough, then leverage dominance to eliminate competitors. The strategy requires resources, patience, and market power. Resources to sustain losses while iterating, patience to endure mockery and poor reviews, market power to ensure the product remains relevant despite inadequacy. Microsoft has all three. Windows keeps shipping. Each version is better than the last. Developers gradually adopt it. The installed base slowly grows. Persistence compounds. The technical evolution from Windows 1.0 to Windows 3.0 involves thousands of incremental improvements. Graphics performance doubles, then doubles again. Memory management becomes sophisticated enough to run multiple programs simultaneously without crashes. Device driver architecture is redesigned 3 times. The user interface is refined through multiple iterations based on usability testing and customer feedback. Application programming interfaces stabilize, allowing developers to invest in Windows applications without fear that the next version will break everything. None of these improvements is revolutionary. Together, they transform an unusable product into a functional one. By 1989, Microsoft's Windows team has learned hard lessons about software development at scale. They establish formal testing procedures. They create compatibility labs where Windows is tested with hundreds of different hardware configurations and applications. They develop automated testing tools. They implement code review processes that catch bugs before they reach customers. The culture shifts from ship it and fix it later to ship it when it actually works. This transformation is necessary because Windows is no longer experimental product, but platform that thousands of developers and millions of users depend on. The responsibility creates technical discipline that was absent in earlier, smaller projects. Windows 3.0, released in 1990, is the breakthrough. The interface is substantially improved. It can run multiple programs simultaneously. It includes a file manager and program manager that make the system navigable. Most importantly, it runs on standard IBM PC hardware. Businesses already own IBM PCs running MS-DOS. Upgrading to Windows is relatively easy. The installed base creates momentum. Within 2 years, Windows 3.0 sells 10 million copies. By 1994, Windows 3.1 and its successors dominate. The graphical interface war is over. Microsoft won. Windows 3.0's success is both technical and strategic. Technically, it is finally good enough, not better than Mac OS, but adequate for business use. Strategically, it leverages Microsoft's installed base. Businesses running MS-DOS can adopt Windows incrementally. Mac requires replacing entire hardware infrastructure. This cost differential is decisive. Quality matters, but compatibility and installed base matter more. Microsoft understands this. Apple does not, or at least does not, respond effectively. During this period, Bill's personal life undergoes changes. He is famous now, frequently photographed, interviewed constantly, his wealth regularly calculated and reported. Forbes begins tracking the richest people in America. Bill appears on the list, his rank climbing each year. In 1987, he meets Melinda French, a Microsoft product manager. She is 23, he is 32. They begin dating. Melinda is smart, organized, and seemingly unintimidated by Bill's intensity. They marry in 1994 in Hawaii, in a ceremony that costs over $1 million and features Willie Nelson performing. They will have 3 children. For years, the marriage appears to be one of the few unambiguously positive aspects of Bill's public persona, the ruthless businessman who nevertheless maintains a stable family life. Melinda French is not intimidated by Bill or Microsoft's culture. She has an MBA from Duke, works in product management, earns respect from colleagues for her strategic thinking and project management capabilities. She and Bill connect intellectually before romantically. They date for several years before marrying, navigating the complexities of a relationship where one partner is becoming globally famous and extraordinarily wealthy. Melinda insists on maintaining her career initially, though eventually focuses on family and, later, the foundation. She represents stability in Bill's otherwise work-consumed life. The 1990s are Microsoft's imperial phase. Windows 95 launches in August 1995 with a $300 million marketing campaign. The company licenses the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up for advertisements. Stores open at midnight for the release. The Windows 95 package, distinctively colored boxes, becomes globally recognizable. The product is genuinely good, a substantial improvement over Windows 3. 1. It integrates MS-DOS and Windows into a single operating system. The Start button becomes iconic. For the first time, Windows is not merely adequate, but actually competitive with Mac OS in interface quality. Windows 95's launch is a cultural phenomenon. People line up at computer stores at midnight. Media coverage is extensive. The Rolling Stones licensing creates mainstream cultural association. Microsoft's dominance is not just market fact, but cultural reality. Windows becomes synonymous with personal computing. The blue screen of death becomes shared reference. The Windows startup sound is globally recognizable. Microsoft has transcended market leadership to become cultural infrastructure. Windows 95's success coincides with the Internet's emergence into mainstream consciousness. Netscape, founded in 1994, creates the Navigator web browser. The browser makes the Internet accessible to non-technical users. Netscape's IPO in August 1995 creates enormous wealth overnight and signals that the Internet represents a fundamental shift in computing. Bill, focused on operating systems and desktop applications, initially underestimates the Internet's significance, but he recognizes the mistake quickly. In December 1995, he writes an internal memo titled "The Internet Tidal Wave," acknowledging that the Internet is the most important development since the PC and that Microsoft must dominate it or be left behind. The memo is remarkable for its candor and speed. Bill recognizes that Microsoft has missed the Internet's importance. Netscape, founded only the previous year, has more credibility and momentum in web technology. Microsoft's position is vulnerable, but the memo also demonstrates strategic flexibility. Bill identifies the threat, acknowledges the mistake, and mobilizes the entire company to respond. Every product group is directed to incorporate Internet functionality. Resources are redirected toward web technologies. The company pivots with remarkable speed and totality. Microsoft's response to the Internet threat is characteristically aggressive. The company develops Internet Explorer, bundling it free with Windows. This undercuts Netscape's business model. Netscape charges for Navigator. Microsoft gives away Internet Explorer. More controversially, Microsoft integrates Internet Explorer deeply into Windows, making it difficult or impossible to remove, and making it the default for many Internet functions. They pressure computer manufacturers to favor Internet Explorer over Navigator. They sign exclusive deals with Internet service providers to make Internet Explorer the default browser. The tactics are systematic and multifaceted. Bundling with Windows ensures ubiquity. Integration makes removal technically difficult. Exclusive deals with OEMs and ISPs limit distribution channels for Netscape. Microsoft offers Windows licensing discounts to manufacturers who agree not to pre-install Netscape. ISPs receive promotional consideration for featuring Internet Explorer. The campaign is coordinated, aggressive, and effective. Each tactic individually might be defensible. Collectively, they represent systematic use of monopoly power to suppress competition. These tactics work. Netscape's market share collapses. By 1999, Internet Explorer dominates. Netscape is sold to AOL for far less than its previous valuation. Microsoft has successfully defended its operating system monopoly against a fundamental threat, but the tactics attract government scrutiny. The United States Department of Justice, in 1998, files an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. The suit alleges that Microsoft has violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by using its Windows monopoly to suppress competition, particularly in the browser market. The case becomes the defining legal battle of the technology industry's first generation. It represents a conflict between two visions of capitalism, one that believes dominant companies should be allowed to leverage their position aggressively, and one that believes concentrated market power must be constrained to preserve competition. The decision to file suit is not simple politics. Career DOJ attorneys spend years investigating Microsoft's practices. They interview competitors, partners, employees. They review thousands of internal emails. The evidence of anti-competitive conduct is extensive. Microsoft's internal communications reveal deliberate strategy to cut off Netscape's air supply, to make competing browsers irrelevant through bundling and exclusive contracts. The case is not about Microsoft being successful. It is about how Microsoft maintains success through leveraging monopoly power to prevent competition. The trial, which begins in October 1998, is dramatic and technical in equal measure. Government lawyers present evidence of Microsoft's tactics, emails discussing how to cut off Netscape's air supply, internal documents about bundling strategies, contracts that punished manufacturers who promoted competing products. Microsoft's defense is that bundling features into Windows benefits consumers by providing integrated functionality, and that the company's aggressive behavior is normal competition. The prosecution constructs a methodical case built on Microsoft's own documents. David Boies and his team have spent months cataloging emails, memos, and internal strategy documents obtained through discovery. They present emails where Microsoft executives discuss how to make competing with Internet Explorer impossible for Netscape. They show contracts where computer manufacturers are offered favorable Windows licensing terms in exchange for excluding or hiding Netscape Navigator. They demonstrate that Microsoft gave Internet service providers promotional placement and revenue sharing to make Internet Explorer their default browser. Each piece of evidence individually might be defensible. Collectively, they reveal systematic strategy to leverage monopoly power. Witnesses testify about Microsoft's tactics. Executives from Netscape describe meetings where Microsoft offered to divide the browser market. Microsoft would take Windows users, Netscape could have other platforms. When Netscape refused, Microsoft began the systematic campaign to destroy them. Intel engineers testify about Microsoft threatening to stop supporting Intel processors if Intel continued developing software that competed with Microsoft products. Apple representatives described negotiations where Microsoft threatened to discontinue Microsoft Office for Macintosh unless Apple made Internet Explorer the default Mac browser. IBM executives detail how Microsoft restricted IBM's ability to modify Windows, punishing IBM for supporting competitors. The testimony paints a picture of a company wielding monopoly power, not just aggressively, but illegally. Microsoft's defense team, led by John Warden, argues that the government misunderstands technology markets and competition. They contend that software markets are inherently different from traditional industries. Network effects and compatibility issues mean that having a dominant standard benefits everyone. They argue that bundling Internet Explorer into Windows is technological integration, not anti-competitive bundling, because web browsing is fundamental operating system functionality. They present witnesses who testify that Microsoft's practices benefit consumers through convenience and low prices. The legal arguments are sophisticated, but they are undermined by the internal documents showing deliberate anti-competitive intent. Bill's deposition videos become the trial's most damaging evidence. Lawyers ask straightforward questions about Microsoft's business practices. Bill responds with evasions, semantic arguments, and apparent memory failures. Asked about conversations documented in emails he claims not to recall. Asked about the meaning of words, he disputes basic definitions. The performance suggests someone who believes he can control the proceeding through verbal maneuvering, who cannot conceive of a situation where he is not the smartest person in the room and therefore not in control. It is also terrible public relations. The videos reveal someone contemptuous of the legal process and arrogant about his own power. The deposition excerpts, when released, shock even Microsoft supporters. In one exchange, government attorney David Boies asks Bill about an email he wrote. Bill claims not to remember writing it. Boies shows him the email with his name on it. Bill claims not to remember what he meant. Boies asks about a specific phrase. Bill claims the phrase is ambiguous. Boies asks what Bill meant by ask in the sentence, "We need to ask them." Bill replies, "What do you mean by ask?" The exchange is simultaneously absurd and revealing. Bill is treating the deposition like a debate he can win through rhetorical tactics. But depositions are not debates. The evasiveness reads as arrogance and dishonesty. Other deposition moments are equally damaging. Asked whether Microsoft competed with Netscape, Bill responds with a digression about the definition of compete. Asked about specific meetings, he claims memory failures with suspicious selectivity. He remembers details that favor Microsoft but cannot recall anything that suggests anti-competitive conduct. At one point, asked about what constitutes very positive reaction in an email he wrote, Bill responds, define very positive. The pattern is consistent. Refuse to concede anything. Dispute every premise. Treat straightforward questions as linguistic puzzles. The strategy might work in business negotiations where the other party needs something from you. In a legal proceeding, it appears evasive and dishonest. The public release of the deposition videos creates PR disaster. Television news programs play the most egregious clips. Comedians mock Bill's evasiveness. Editorial pages that previously supported Microsoft question whether the company's leadership can be trusted. Even within Microsoft, employees watch the videos with dismay. Many have believed the company's official position that Microsoft is being punished for success, that antitrust enforcement is government overreach. The deposition videos undermine that narrative. Bill does not look like someone being treated unfairly. He looks like someone trying to obstruct a legitimate investigation. The trial extends over months, with dozens of witnesses and thousands of pages of evidence. Judge Jackson hears testimony about technological standards, network effects, market definition, consumer welfare economics. Expert witnesses debate whether browsers are separate products or operating system components, whether Microsoft's practices harmed or benefited consumers, whether alternative competition scenarios were plausible. The legal and economic arguments are sophisticated, but the core question is simpler. Did Microsoft use monopoly power illegally to suppress competition? The internal emails provide clear answer. Inside Microsoft, the trial creates siege mentality. Employees view the government as adversary motivated by politics rather than law. They believe Microsoft is being punished for success, that competitors who failed in the market are using government to achieve, through regulation, what they could not achieve through competition. There is some truth to this. Companies like Netscape and Sun Microsystems actively lobbied for antitrust action, but the employee perspective misses the legal substance. The question is not whether Microsoft is successful, but whether it maintained success through illegal means. The evidence suggests it did. The trial also reveals internal cultural problems. Multiple former employees testify about Microsoft's aggressive tactics and internal culture. They describe meetings where executives discussed crushing competitors, where ethical concerns were dismissed as weakness, where the assumption was that Microsoft should win every market it entered by any means necessary. Current employees are forbidden from speaking to press, creating information asymmetry where only critics and former employees provide public perspective. Microsoft's PR team struggles to counteract the narrative. Every defense sounds like excuse. Every statement is filtered through the deposition videos, which have established Bill as unreliable narrator. Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson rules against Microsoft in 2000. The ruling is damning. Jackson finds that Microsoft maintained its operating system monopoly through anti-competitive practices, that it attempted to monopolize the browser market, and that it bundled Internet Explorer into Windows to suppress competition. The proposed remedy is dramatic. Break Microsoft into two companies, one for operating systems and one for applications. The breakup would destroy the integrated model that made Microsoft dominant. Jackson's findings of fact are detailed and devastating. He determines that Microsoft deliberately set out to destroy Netscape, not through superior products, but through leveraging Windows' monopoly. He finds that Microsoft's integration of Internet Explorer into Windows was pretextual, designed to suppress competition rather than provide consumer value. He concludes that Microsoft's conduct harmed consumers by reducing innovation and choice. The legal analysis is rigorous. The conclusions are unambiguous. Microsoft is a monopolist that violated antitrust law. The findings document specific anti-competitive actions in forensic detail. Jackson cites emails where Bill wrote about the need to cut off Netscape's air supply. He details contracts where manufacturers were threatened with unfavorable licensing terms if they promoted competing browsers. He describes meetings where Microsoft attempted to divide markets with competitors, which is per se illegal under antitrust law. He analyzes technical decisions like integrating Internet Explorer into Windows so deeply that removing it would break the operating system, and determines they were motivated by anti-competitive intent rather than technical necessity. Each finding is supported by evidence. The ruling is not ideological attack on success. It is legal determination based on documented conduct. The breakup remedy is designed to separate Microsoft's monopoly business from its competitive businesses. The operating system company would maintain Windows but could not bundle additional products. The applications company would develop Office, Explorer, and other software but would not have preferential access to Windows. The theory is that separation would prevent Microsoft from leveraging operating system monopoly into other markets. The remedy is modeled on AT&T's breakup in the 1980s, which resulted in increased competition in telecommunications. Whether it would have worked for Microsoft remains unknowable because the remedy is never implemented. Bill is devastated. The prospect of dismantling his company represents not just business defeat but personal failure. Microsoft appeals. The case drags through appellate courts. Eventually, in 2001, a settlement is reached. Microsoft is not broken up. Instead, it accepts conduct restrictions. It must allow computer manufacturers more freedom to feature non-Microsoft software, must share some interface information with competitors, must submit to monitoring to ensure compliance. The settlement is weaker than the initial ruling, but still constrains Microsoft's behavior. The company's ability to leverage Windows to crush competitors is limited. The settlement is both victory and defeat for Microsoft. Victory because the company remains intact. Defeat because the conduct restrictions constrain the tactics that built dominance. More subtly, the trial and publicity have changed Microsoft's cultural position. The company is no longer the scrappy innovator, but the convicted monopolist. The narrative has shifted. This affects recruitment, partnerships, regulatory relationships. Microsoft must operate more carefully, more defensively. The era of unconstrained aggression is over. The antitrust case marks a turning point. Microsoft's growth continues, but its cultural dominance wanes. The company that defined personal computing in the 1980s and 1990s becomes less central in the 2000s as the Internet shifts computing away from desktop applications toward web services. Google, founded in 1998, rises to dominance in search and online advertising without Microsoft successfully challenging it. Apple, nearly bankrupt in the 1990s, recovers under Steve Jobs and becomes the most valuable technology company by focusing on mobile devices and ecosystem integration. Microsoft attempts multiple initiatives, search engines, mobile operating systems, tablets, that fail to gain significant market share. Microsoft's decline is relative rather than absolute. The company remains profitable, Windows remains dominant on desktop computers, Office remains the standard for productivity software. But the locus of innovation and growth shifts elsewhere. Google captures search and advertising, Apple captures mobile. Amazon captures cloud infrastructure. Facebook captures social networking. Microsoft participates in these markets but does not dominate them. The company becomes successful legacy incumbent rather than industry leader. Bill, meanwhile, begins his transition away from Microsoft. In 2000, he steps down as CEO, handing the role to Steve Ballmer while remaining chairman and chief software architect. The same year, He and Melinda formally established the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, consolidating their existing charitable activities into what will become the world's largest private foundation. The foundation's initial focus is global health, particularly diseases like malaria and tuberculosis that disproportionately affect poor countries. The scale of the foundation's resources, eventually over $50 billion, allows it to function almost as a parallel health organization to the World Health Organization. The foundation's establishment is both philanthropy and legacy management. Bill is 45 years old, extraordinarily wealthy, with a reputation damaged by the antitrust trial. The foundation offers an opportunity to deploy wealth toward genuinely important problems while rehabilitating his public image. The focus on global health, particularly diseases affecting the poorest populations, positions Bill as humanitarian rather than monopolist. This is strategically astute. It is also, by all evidence, genuinely motivated. Bill becomes obsessed with global health metrics the way he was once obsessed with code quality. The transition from technology to philanthropy is not seamless. Bill's first instinct is to approach global health the way he approached software: identify the problem, engineer a solution, deploy it at scale. This works for some challenges and fails spectacularly for others. Early foundation efforts to reform American education, for instance, invest billions in small schools initiatives based on theory that smaller class sizes improve outcomes. The initiative fails because education is not an engineering problem with technical solutions. It involves politics, culture, teacher quality, family circumstances, community resources. Bill's data-driven approach cannot account for these complexities. The foundation eventually acknowledges the failure, but not before spending years and enormous resources on an approach that did not work. The learning curve is steep and sometimes painful. Bill meets with public health experts who explain that vaccine distribution in sub-Saharan Africa is not a logistics problem that can be solved with better software. It involves weak infrastructure, political instability, corruption, cultural resistance, lack of trained healthcare workers, unreliable electricity for refrigeration. These are systemic problems that cannot be solved by philanthropic funding alone. Bill's initial response is frustration. Why can't these problems be solved if sufficient resources are applied? The answer, gradually absorbed through experience, is that complex social problems are different from technical problems. They require political solutions, cultural change, capacity building, sustained engagement rather than one-time interventions. The foundation structure reflects Bill's management style, adapted to philanthropy. Patty Stoneziffer, recruited from Microsoft, becomes the first CEO, bringing corporate efficiency to foundation operations. The organization operates with clear metrics, defined objectives, quarterly reviews. Grant recipients must provide detailed reporting on outcomes. Programs that do not meet benchmarks are terminated. The culture is more rigorous than traditional philanthropy, less sentimental, more focused on measurable impact. This approach has advantages. Resources are deployed efficiently, failures are identified quickly, successful programs are scaled rapidly. It also has limitations. Some important work cannot be measured easily. Some communities need support that does not fit neat metrics. Some problems require patient, long-term commitment rather than performance pressure. Melinda's role in the foundation is initially underestimated by outsiders who assume she is Bill's wife, lending her name rather than co-equal partner. This misperception is wrong. Melinda shapes the foundation's approach to family planning, gender equality, and community engagement. Where Bill focuses on technical solutions and quantitative metrics, Melinda emphasizes listening to affected communities and understanding social context. Her influence moves the foundation toward more nuanced approaches that combine Bill's analytical rigor with attention to political and cultural realities. The partnership is complementary, Bill brings strategic vision and systems thinking. Melinda brings empathy and understanding of how interventions affect individuals and communities. The Foundation's early projects reveal both its potential and its limitations. The Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi, launched with substantial Gates Foundation funding, demonstrates what is possible. By pooling resources and negotiating vaccine prices, Gavi makes vaccinations affordable for poor countries, saving millions of lives. The model works because it addresses a tractable problem, vaccine cost and distribution, where funding and logistics can make decisive difference. But other initiatives struggle. Attempts to develop new malaria vaccines face scientific challenges that money alone cannot solve. Education reform efforts in the US encounter political resistance and implementation problems. Agricultural development projects in Africa face complex issues of land rights, climate change, and market access that cannot be solved through technical interventions alone. Bill's public engagement with philanthropy evolves through trial and error. His early speeches and interviews have the same combative tone he used at Microsoft. He knows the solutions, critics are wrong or uninformed, resistance is irrational. This approach alienates potential allies and misses opportunities for learning. Gradually, with coaching and experience, his public presentation softens. He learns to acknowledge complexity, to say, "We're still learning," rather than "We have the answer," to present the Foundation's work as partnership, rather than solution imposed from above. The evolution is pragmatic rather than philosophical. He adjusts his approach because the original approach did not work, not because his underlying worldview has fundamentally changed. The shift from Microsoft to philanthropy is gradual but deliberate. Bill reduces his Microsoft involvement incrementally. By 2008, he transitions to part-time status at Microsoft to focus primarily on foundation work. In 2014, he steps down as chairman. In 2020, he resigns from the board entirely. The man who built Microsoft and dominated personal computing for 3 decades methodically removes himself from the company, replacing that identity with a new one, global philanthropist. This transformation is remarkable both for its scale and its calculated nature. Bill approaches philanthropy the same way he approached software. Identify the problem, analyze the systems, apply resources strategically, measure results obsessively. The Foundation operates less like a traditional charity and more like a venture capital firm focused on global health and education. Projects are funded based on expected return on investment, lives saved per dollar spent, disease burden reduced, systemic change created. Grantees must provide detailed metrics. Unsuccessful programs are terminated. The approach is rationalist, technocratic, and occasionally tone-deaf to political and cultural complexities, but it is also extraordinarily well-resourced and often effective. The Foundation's work on malaria provides an example. Between 2000 and 2025, the Foundation invests over $2 billion in malaria prevention and treatment, funding bed net distribution, vaccine development, epidemiological research, public health infrastructure in affected countries. During this period, global malaria deaths declined by approximately 60%. Not all of this reduction is attributable to Gates Foundation work. Government health programs, other NGOs, economic development all contribute. But the Foundation's resources and focus accelerate progress substantially. Similar patterns appear in tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, polio eradication, and maternal health. Bill becomes as obsessed with global health metrics as he once was with market share. He studies epidemiology, reads research papers, meets with scientists and public health officials. He can discuss the reproductive number of infectious diseases, the cost-effectiveness of different interventions, the logistics of vaccine distribution in low infrastructure settings. The same analytical intensity that made him a great programmer makes him an effective philanthropist. He identifies leverage points, interventions that save the most lives per dollar, and directs resources accordingly. Bill's public image undergoes rehabilitation during this period. The ruthless monopolist of the 1990s becomes the thoughtful philanthropist of the 2000s and 2010s. He gives TED Talks about global health and climate change. He writes books and blog posts about development economics, energy technology, and pandemic preparedness. He becomes a familiar figure at Davos and similar gatherings of global elites. The transformation is genuine. He clearly cares deeply about the foundation's work and invests enormous time understanding development challenges, but it is also strategic image management. The foundation's work provides moral legitimacy that counterbalances the monopolistic business practices of his Microsoft years. The rehabilitation is remarkably successful. By 2010, Bill is widely respected as global philanthropist. Media coverage emphasizes foundation work and downplays Microsoft's antitrust history. Bill's predictions about future pandemics made in TED Talks and interviews are taken seriously. When COVID-19 emerges in 2020, Bill is positioned as expert voice on pandemic response. The monopolist has become sage. The transformation is not erasure. The antitrust history remains, but it is reframing. The dominant narrative becomes redemption. Businessman who accumulated wealth aggressively now deploys it for good. In 2021, Bill and Melinda announced their divorce after 27 years of marriage. The announcement is carefully worded. They will continue working together on the foundation, but their marriage is ending. Details emerge gradually. Reports surface about Bill's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the financier and sex offender. Bill met with Epstein multiple times between 2011 and 2013, after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. Bill's spokespeople initially characterized the meetings as philanthropy-related, then acknowledged they were a mistake. Melinda reportedly was uncomfortable with the Epstein connection and raised concerns. Other reports suggest workplace behavior at Microsoft that included unwanted attention toward female employees. Nothing approaches the level of criminal conduct, but the pattern suggests the same disregard for boundaries that characterized Microsoft's business tactics. The Epstein relationship warrants deeper examination because it reveals something about how wealth and power distort judgment. Epstein, by 2011, was a registered sex offender whose crimes were public knowledge. His professional reputation was destroyed, yet he maintained access to prominent wealthy men through a combination of flattery, apparent financial expertise, and connections to other elites. Bill's first meeting with Epstein, according to later reporting, was facilitated by mutual acquaintances who presented Epstein as someone with connections to wealthy philanthropists who might contribute to Bill's foundation work. The pitch was that Epstein knew people, could open doors, had expertise in managing large fortunes. Bill met with Epstein at least 6 times, according to investigative reporting by the New York Times. The meetings included dinners at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, a visit to Epstein's private island, and a flight on Epstein's private jet. Bill's representatives initially denied the relationship was significant, then acknowledged the meetings but claimed they were entirely focused on philanthropy. This explanation became untenable when journalists documented that the meetings included social elements, dinners with other guests, conversations unrelated to charitable work, personal rapport building that extended beyond business necessity. What was Bill thinking? The charitable interpretation is that he was naive. He believed Epstein's claims about connections to wealthy donors and did not adequately investigate Epstein's background or consider the reputational risk. This interpretation is difficult to sustain for someone as strategic as Bill. He built Microsoft through careful assessment of risks and opportunities. The idea that he would repeatedly meet with a convicted sex offender without considering the implications strains credulity. The less charitable interpretation is that Bill enjoyed Epstein's company, found the exclusive social milieu appealing, and believed his wealth and power insulated him from consequences of associating with a pariah. This interpretation fits better with Bill's history of believing rules that constrain others do not apply to him. Melinda's discomfort with the Epstein relationship was evident early. According to people close to the couple, she expressed concerns after the first meeting, questioning why Bill would associate with someone with Epstein's history. Bill apparently dismissed the concerns, characterizing them as excessive caution. After additional meetings, Melinda's concerns intensified. She reportedly told Bill that continuing the relationship was unacceptable and would damage the foundation's reputation. Bill continued meeting with Epstein despite these objections. This pattern, Melinda raising legitimate concerns, Bill dismissing them and proceeding anyway, suggests a dynamic where Bill's judgment was considered definitive regardless of others' input. The New York Times reporting, published in 2019, brought the Epstein relationship into public view at a time when Epstein was again facing criminal charges for sex trafficking. Bill's representatives issued statements calling the relationship a mistake and claiming Bill regretted it. But the damage was done. The foundation's reputation, built on moral authority to address global problems, was tainted by association with someone who trafficked underage girls. Partners and grantees questioned whether the foundation's leadership exercised sound judgment. Employees reportedly confronted foundation leadership, asking how they should respond when asked about the Epstein connection. Additional revelations about Bill's workplace behavior at Microsoft emerged after the divorce announcement. Multiple women who worked at Microsoft in the 1990s and 2000s described Bill as having sent inappropriate emails, made uncomfortable personal inquiries, and pursued relationships with subordinates. The accounts do not allege assault or harassment that would meet legal definitions, but they describe a pattern where Bill's interest in female employees created uncomfortable situations because of the power differential. A CEO expressing personal interest in an entry-level employee is not neutral. It is inherently coercive because refusing carries potential career consequences. One reported incident involves a Microsoft employee Bill met at a presentation in 2006. According to the woman's account, Bill sent her emails suggesting they meet outside work. The emails were not explicitly sexual, but were clearly personal rather than professional. The woman felt uncomfortable but also believed refusing might affect her career. She eventually changed departments to avoid further contact. Microsoft's HR department was apparently aware of the situation but took no action against Bill. This passivity reflects the reality that founders of successful companies often operate with minimal accountability, regardless of formal policies. The workplace behavior pattern suggests that the same characteristics that made Bill effective in business, relentless pursuit of objectives, unwillingness to accept no as answer, belief that his judgment should prevail, translated poorly to personal relationships where mutuality and respect for boundaries are essential. A CEO who will not accept technical objections and overrules dissent may build a successful company, but a person who applies the same approach to personal relationships becomes coercive, using power differentials to override others' autonomy. The divorce and associated revelations complicate Bill's carefully constructed philanthropist image without completely destroying it. He remains enormously wealthy. His net worth in 2025 exceeds $100 billion. The foundation continues its work, though Melinda secures provisions ensuring her influence. Bill continues writing and speaking about global challenges, but the moral authority he accumulated during his philanthropic years is diminished. The story is messier now, more human, less easily simplified into redemptive arc. The foundation's future becomes complicated by the divorce. The agreement stipulates that Melinda can resign after 2 years if she and Bill cannot work together effectively, taking a substantial financial settlement to establish her own philanthropic organization. This provision recognizes that the foundation's work depends on their ability to collaborate despite personal rupture. It also acknowledges that Melinda's participation is not merely ceremonial. She brings perspective and relationships that are essential to the foundation's effectiveness. The prospect of the foundation splitting creates uncertainty for partners and grantees who rely on its resources. Bill's public appearances after the divorce reveal someone attempting to manage a damaged reputation while maintaining relevance. He continues giving interviews about climate change, pandemic preparedness, and technology trends. Interviewers inevitably ask about Epstein and the divorce. Bill's responses are carefully scripted. He acknowledges mistakes, expresses regret, and attempts to redirect conversation to foundation work. The performances are competent but lack conviction. The analytical intensity that characterizes his discussion of malaria epidemiology or nuclear power technology is absent when discussing personal failures. He wants the topic to go away but cannot make it disappear through force of will, and the inability to control the narrative clearly frustrates him. To understand Bill Gates, to understand what his life reveals about success, power, privilege, and the stories we tell about all three, requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. He is genuinely brilliant, a programmer of exceptional skill who could grasp complex systems and identify leverage points others missed. He is also someone whose opportunities were extraordinary and largely unacknowledged in his own narrative. He is someone who worked obsessively, sacrificing normal social life and personal balance for computing mastery and business success. He is also someone who ruthlessly exploited every advantage, including friendships, to accumulate power and wealth. He is someone who genuinely wants to solve global health problems and has deployed vast resources toward that goal. He is also someone whose philanthropy preserves and legitimizes concentrated wealth and power rather than fundamentally redistributing it. The story we have told about Bill Gates has evolved through several phases, each serving particular narrative needs. In the 1980s, he was the boy wonder, the Harvard dropout who built a tech empire through genius and determination. This story served the tech industry's mythology of meritocracy and validated the emerging cult of the entrepreneur. In the 1990s, he became the monopolist, the ruthless businessman whose company crushed competition and stifled innovation. This story served as warning about concentrated corporate power and justified antitrust intervention. In the 2000s and 2010s, he became the enlightened billionaire, the capitalist who recognized his obligation to use wealth for good and dedicated himself to global challenges. This story served to legitimize billionaire philanthropy and suggest that concentrated wealth could be socially beneficial if properly directed. Each of these stories contains truth. None is complete. The most accurate story, the one that explains not just what happened, but what it reveals about how success actually works, is more uncomfortable than any of these simplified versions. Bill Gates was born into privilege, not extreme wealth, but professional class privilege, the privilege of elite education, professional networks, parental support for intellectual development, and crucially, access to rare resources at formative moments. A middle-class kid in 1968 does not get 10,000 hours of computer access unless extraordinary circumstances align. Most brilliant, obsessive 13-year-olds interested in computing in 1968 have no computers to access. They become engineers or programmers eventually, but they do not get the head start that creates historical advantage. Bill recognized opportunities and executed on them brilliantly. The basic interpreter for Altair required legitimate technical skill and work ethic. The decision to drop out of Harvard and start Microsoft required risk tolerance and vision. But the opportunities themselves, the Harvard enrollment that provided both credential and computer access, the lakeside education that developed confidence and connections, the family support that made dropping out low risk, the technical foundation that made the basic interpreter possible, were products of circumstance, not merit alone. The IBM deal that created Microsoft's dominance was not primarily technical achievement, it was business negotiation. Bill convinced IBM to accept non-exclusive licensing of MS-DOS. This required understanding IBM's blind spots, their focus on hardware over software, their dismissiveness of the small startup, and exploiting them. It required audacity to claim ownership of an operating system Microsoft had purchased for $50,000 and license it as if it were Microsoft's creation. It required recognizing that controlling the software standard was more valuable than any single hardware contract. These are business insights, not programming achievements. Microsoft's sustained dominance from 1981 to 2000 resulted from leveraging market position, not superior products. Windows was rarely technically better than competitors. It was entrenched. MS-DOS became standard because IBM chose it, not because it was best. Windows became dominant because it ran on IBM PC hardware and maintained compatibility with MS-DOS applications. Internet Explorer defeated Netscape through bundling and anti-competitive contracts, not superior browsing experience. Microsoft succeeded by making its adequate products unavoidable, then gradually improving them while preventing competitors from gaining traction. This is not a story about genius triumphant. It is a story about compound advantages. Start with privilege, add opportunity, execute competently, leverage success into market position, use market position to eliminate competition, accumulate resources that enable next phase opportunities. Repeat. The system rewards not just ability but initial position. Bill was smart enough and driven enough to exploit his advantages fully. Many people have equivalent intelligence and drive but lack the initial advantages to compound. The philanthropy phase represents genuine commitment to using wealth for good, but it also preserves power. The Gates Foundation operates with resources comparable to small nations' health budgets. Its priorities, which diseases to target, which interventions to fund, which countries to focus on, shape global health policy. Bill has no democratic mandate for this influence. His accountability is to foundation trustees, not to the populations affected by foundation work. This is not necessarily malign. The foundation does real good, but it represents privatization of what might otherwise be public sector work, funded through taxation and governed through democratic processes. The question, is Bill Gates self-made, depends entirely on what self-made means. If it means built a company and accumulated wealth through effort rather than inheritance, then yes, absolutely, Bill did not inherit Microsoft or his fortune. If it means succeeded through individual merit without structural advantages, then no, clearly not. The opportunities that made his success possible were products of family wealth, elite institutions, and fortuitous timing. If it means primary architect of own success rather than passive beneficiary of circumstance, the answer is somewhere in between. Bill made choices and executed strategies that many people in his position would not have, but he was never in a position available to more than a tiny fraction of people his age. The deeper question is why the self-made narrative matters so much. We want to believe that success results purely from individual merit because it implies a just world where talent and effort reliably produce reward. If Bill succeeded primarily through privilege compounded by strategic ruthlessness, it suggests a less comforting reality. Success depends heavily on circumstances beyond individual control, and accumulating success requires exploiting advantages others lack. This is descriptively true but normatively uncomfortable, so we simplify the story. We emphasize the dropout narrative and minimize the Harvard enrollment. We celebrate the basic interpreter and ignore the 10,000 hours of rare computer access that made it possible. We focus on work ethic and vision while treating privilege as irrelevant backstory. Bill himself seems genuinely unaware of how extraordinary his advantages were. In interviews, he regularly attributes his success to obsessive work, strategic thinking, and willingness to take risks. He mentions Lakeside's computer access, but frames it as fortunate opportunity rather than extraordinary privilege. He describes dropping out of Harvard as brave choice rather than low-risk option enabled by family support and fallback options. This is not dishonesty. It is the natural human tendency to attribute success to internal characteristics and failures to external circumstances. From inside his own experience, his work ethic and intelligence are salient. The advantages are invisible because they constituted his normal environment. What then does Bill Gates's life reveal about human possibility and limitation? It demonstrates that obsessive focus on a domain during formative years creates expertise that feels like genius. It shows that strategic positioning, controlling standards and platforms rather than individual products, creates durable advantage in technology markets. It illustrates that compound advantages accelerate exponentially once established. It reveals that concentrated wealth can accomplish genuine good while simultaneously preserving power structures. And it confirms something uncomfortable. Exceptional success requires not just exceptional ability, but exceptional circumstance. And the narrative we tell about success systematically minimizes the circumstantial component, because acknowledging it would undermine the ideology that justifies inequality. The conference room in 1998 represents the moment these contradictions collide with external constraint. Bill has spent his entire adult life operating in environments he could control: programming, where logic and skill determine outcomes; business negotiation, where information asymmetry and strategic thinking create advantage; corporate leadership, where hierarchical authority enables control. The deposition represents something different, a context where his normal strategies do not work, where semantic games and memory failures read as arrogance rather than cleverness, where being the smartest person in the room is insufficient because the other side controls the process. His performance in that deposition, combative, evasive, contemptuous, reveals someone who has never had to lose, who has accumulated enough success that submission to external authority feels incomprehensible. It is the same quality that made Microsoft dominant: the inability to accept limits, the refusal to concede even small points, the instinct to fight for control in every interaction. These characteristics drove his success. But here they backfire, revealing the monopolist's mentality to a judge and public already skeptical of his power. The tragedy, if there is one, is that Bill never had to develop the capacity to lose gracefully because he lost so rarely. Privilege and ability combined to create nearly uninterrupted success from age 13 onward. The computer terminal responds to correct code. There is no ambiguity, no politics, no need for deference. Business negotiation rewards information advantage and strategic ruthlessness. Bill excels at both. Market dominance, once established, is self-reinforcing. Competitors can be crushed through resource advantage. By the time external forces constrains him through antitrust action, he has 3 decades of experience with success resulting from control. The deposition failures stem from applying successful strategies to an inappropriate context. He tries to control the proceeding through verbal maneuvering when he should concede and minimize damage. This is the limitation of the autodidact genius narrative. Bill is not a genius in any general sense. He is a brilliant programmer and strategic businessman who developed expertise in narrow domains. Outside those domains, he has ordinary human failings, but decades of success in his domains created confidence that generalized. The same man who revolutionized personal computing made catastrophic public relations mistakes because he believed his intelligence translated across contexts. The same strategic ruthlessness that built Microsoft alienated partners and employees. The same obsessive focus that created market dominance produced failures in judgment about personal relationships and reputation. By 2025, what remains, Microsoft continues, no longer dominant but still profitable and significant. Windows is giving way to cloud computing and mobile platforms, but the transition is gradual and managed. Bill's fortune persists, exceeding $100 billion even after decades of philanthropy and the divorce settlement. The Gates Foundation operates at scale, funding global health initiatives that save lives and reduce suffering. His reputation is complicated, neither pure villain nor pure hero, but something more interesting. A figure whose contradictions reflect contradictions in how market capitalism intersects with technology, privilege, and power. The opening scene, Bill in the deposition, semantic games and memory failures on display, now appears inevitable. Everything about his life led to that moment. The privilege that provided opportunity, the obsessive focus that created expertise, the strategic ruthlessness that built monopoly, the success that prevented learning from failure, the power that made external constraints seem impossible, the arrogance that made graceful submission inconceivable. He sits in that room unable to do what the situation requires because his entire life has taught him that control is possible, that intelligence wins, that surrender is unnecessary. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Bill Gates represents not the self-made genius but the privileged optimizer, someone born into sufficient advantage to access rare resources, brilliant enough to maximize those resources, strategic enough to convert success into market dominance, and fortunate enough to build wealth before regulatory constraint tightened. His success depended on being the right person in the right place at the right time, with the right combination of skills and advantages. His limitations stemmed from the same source: success without sufficient external constraint or failure to develop adaptability. We want Bill's story to be simple, either triumph of merit or indictment of monopoly, or redemption through philanthropy. But the accurate story is that he is all of these and none of them completely. He is a person whose talents genuinely mattered, whose opportunities were extraordinarily rare, whose success required ruthlessness most people never deploy, whose wealth creates genuine good while preserving concentrated power, whose legacy is neither purely positive nor purely negative, but deeply ambiguous. He is, finally, what most historically significant figures are: a human whose particular combination of ability and circumstance produced outcomes that shaped the world, whose choices reveal as much about the systems they operated within as about their individual character, and whose life resists simplification into either hero or villain. The boy in the computer room at Lakeside in 1968, obsessively programming through the night, could not have imagined where that obsession would lead. The billionaire in the conference room in 1998, contemptuous of legal proceedings against his monopoly, could not have imagined how that contempt would reshape his legacy. The philanthropist in 2025, distributing billions to fight disease while navigating divorce and reputation damage, represents not the end of the story but its latest chapter. What remains constant across all phases is the drive to control, to optimize, to win. The contest has changed from programming to market dominance to legacy management, but the impulse persists. And perhaps that impulse to master systems, to accumulate advantage, to refuse limitation, is both what makes someone like Bill Gates possible and what makes the world their success, creates complicated, powerful, and deeply imperfect.